The blow landed without warning. Before I could even blink, my head snapped to the side and my glasses slipped off, skidding across the polished ballroom floor and breaking into pieces. But 130 guests froze, trapped in a stunned silence. My face throbbed, yet the ache in my chest was unbearable. Juliet, my daughter Inla, had just struck me on her wedding day because I refused to give her the keys to my apartment. "This is what happens when you're greedy," she yelled, her voice echoing through the room. "A woman your age has no use for all that space." The quiet afterward was suffocating. I knelt down, hands shaking, reaching for my shattered glasses. No one stepped forward. Some guests stared at the walls, others murmured behind their hands. But not a single person defended the humiliated older woman standing alone in the center of the celebration. My son Ethan didn't move. He stared at the floor as though I didn't exist at all. "You don't belong here anymore," Juliet went on, adjusting her flawless white dress. "Ethan and I need privacy to build our future. Your apartment is ideal for us while we look for something better." Every word dripped with cruelty. For months I had tolerated her patronizing remarks about my outdated wardrobe, my aging car, my modest lifestyle. But this moment shattered something that could never be repaired. I stood up slowly, aware of every gaze piercing into me. Tears blurred my vision, yet inside something hardened. That slap was more than an insult. It was the breaking point. For years, I had lived quietly, never drawing attention to myself, hiding truths no one knew, not even my own son. As I made my way toward the exit, memories flooded back. I remembered the first time Juliet visited my apartment 2 years earlier. Her expression tightened when she saw the plain furniture, the small kitchen, the simple space I called home. "This is where your mother lived," she had said to Ethan, loud enough for me to hear. From that day on, every visit became an exercise in silent humiliation. 3 months ago, at a family dinner, she smiled sweetly and said, "Aurora, you really should downsize. At your age, maintaining a place like that is too much. And Ethan and I want children. We'll need the space." Her smile was a performance. Ethan never noticed. Around her, he seemed to disappear, agreeing with everything she said like a marionette. The insults didn't come all at once. They crept in slowly. First, "My clothes. Torara, don't you own anything more fashionable than my car? That thing is ancient. It's dangerous for someone like you to be driving it." And yet I endured until I couldn't anymore. After that, she turned her attention to my part-time job at the neighborhood flower shop. "I just don't get it," Juliet once said with a laugh. "Why a woman your age still works instead of enjoying retirement." Every remark was like a thin, poisoned needle, quietly piercing my dignity. My name is Aurora Hughes. I am 68 years old, and I have spent my entire life choosing modesty over display. I work 3 days a week in a small flower shop. I drive a car that's over a decade old. I shop at discount stores and avoid anything extravagant. To the outside world, and especially to Juliet, I am nothing more than a widowed middle-class woman surviving on a limited income. That perception was no accident. It was an image I had deliberately maintained for years. What none of those people whispering behind my back realized was that my life had once been very different. Before my husband passed away, everything was different. Robert was not the simple office employee everyone assumed he was. Together, we had chosen a quiet life, one without excess or attention. We hid our true financial standing intentionally, valuing privacy and safety over recognition, a decision that now felt eerily forestighed. As I walked out of the ballroom, the murmurs trailed behind me like a poisonous fog. Poor woman. She looks so weak, Juliet's aunt whispered. The bride isn't wrong, Ethan's cousin added. She can't even take care of herself anymore. She belongs in a retirement home, not living alone, someone else said. Feigning sympathy, their words burned, each one searing deeper than the last. The cold blast from the ballroom's air conditioning clashed painfully with the fire building in my chest. My fingers shook as I searched through my worn black purse, a purse I'd carried for 5 years. Not out of necessity, but because I valued usefulness over image, a concept Juliet would never understand. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number etched into my memory. I hadn't called it in over a year, foolishly hoping I never would need to. Carlos, it's Aurora, I said quietly. I need you at the Royal Oaks Ballroom. Immediately, bring the documents, the ones you know about. There was a brief pause. Mrs. Hughes, Carlos replied carefully, concern layered beneath his professional tone. If we proceed, there's no undoing it. I turned back one last time. Through the glass doors, I saw Juliet laughing with her friends, undoubtedly boasting about how she had finally put her useless mother-in-law in her place. Ethan stood beside her, smiling faintly. Not an ounce of regret on his face. I'm absolutely sure, I said, my voice steady now. 30 minutes. Carlos. No delays. I ended the call and headed for my car, my steps firm and purposeful. For the first time in many years, I was ready to shed the facade I had worn to shield my family. At last, they would meet the real Aurora Hughes. And when the truth finally shattered their carefully constructed illusions, they would learn what regret truly meant. The parking lot was nearly empty, illuminated by tall streetlights that stretched long shadows across the asphalt. I slipped into my aging sedan and sat there counting the minutes. 30 minutes until everything changed. 30 minutes before they realized they had made the gravest error of their lives by publicly humiliating the very woman who had been quietly supporting them in ways they could never have imagined. As I waited, memories surged through my mind, relentless and vivid. This moment had been set in motion 2.5 years earlier. The day Ethan showed up at my apartment, wearing that anxious smile I remembered from his childhood. "Mum, I want you to meet someone important," he had said. Then Juliet stepped inside, impeccably styled hair, designer clothing, and a polished smile that felt hollow. From the very beginning, something felt off. Her gaze swept through my apartment, measuring every detail with thinly disguised judgment. I understood her intentions instantly. "So cozy," she had commented, her eyes drifting over my second-hand furniture and sun-faded curtains. The word itself was kind, but her tone was anything but. Ethan, blinded by infatuation, missed the disdain entirely. That first dinner was painfully awkward. Juliet barely touched the meal I had prepared with care, explaining she was watching her figure. When I asked about her family, her answers were vague, yet she showed unmistakable interest in my finances. "And how do you manage on a widow's pension, Aurora?" she asked, her voice coated in false sympathy. "It must be difficult living on such a small income." What Juliet failed to realize was that I was studying her just as closely. Over the following months, troubling patterns emerged. Each visit came with remarks about how outdated my home was, how I deserved something better at my age. But her attention always returned to the details that truly mattered: the prestigious neighborhood, the sweeping view from my balcony, the generous size of the rooms. One afternoon, while Ethan was in the bathroom, I overheard her whispering on the phone in my kitchen. "Yes, Mum," she said softly. "His mother's apartment is in a very expensive area. If I can convince her to move somewhere smaller, we can live here until we buy our own place. She's so gullible, she'd probably thank us for helping her." Her words sliced through me. But when she returned to the living room, I greeted her with calm politeness, as though I had heard nothing at all. From that moment on, every interaction with Juliet became a carefully orchestrated performance on both our parts. She played the concerned daughter-in-law, worried about her mother-in-law's well-being, while I pretended to be the vulnerable old woman who needed. But inside, I was gathering information, observing her moves, understanding her true motivations. It was like a game of chess where we both thought we were winning. The following months brought a gradual escalation in her attempts at manipulation. First, there were the subtle suggestions. "Aurora, I've seen some lovely apartments for people your age with all-inclusive services and no maintenance worries." Then came the more direct pressures. "You can't keep living alone at your age. It's dangerous. What if you fall and no one finds out for days?" Each argument was designed to make me feel incompetent and helpless. Ethan, my own son, began to echoed the same phrases like a trained parrot. Mum, Juliet is right. Maybe it would be better for you to consider moving to a more manageable place. Seeing him gradually transform into that woman's puppet was more painful than any direct insult. The son I had raised with so much love and sacrifice now saw me as an obstacle to his happiness. The psychological campaign intensified after they announced their engagement. Visits became more frequent, but also more. Juliet had started bringing real estate magazines and brochures for senior communities. I'm just exploring options for you, Aurora. I want to make sure you have the best quality of life possible, she would see, spreading the materials on my coffee table as if it were a business negotiation. But I had been doing my own research. One afternoon, when they went out to run wedding errands, I decided to call an old friend who worked in real estate. Amelia, I need you to investigate something for me. I told her there's a couple who are very interested in my apartment, and I want to know more about their real financial situation. What I discovered chilled me to the bone. Juliet and Ethan were neck-deep in debt. The wedding they were planning cost more than $50,000, completely licensed with credit cards and personal loans. The apartment they were renting was on the verge of eviction for non-payment. The luxury cars they drove were financed with payments they couldn't afford. Their lifestyle was a facade built on suffocating debt. Everything started to make sense. The rush to get married, the insistence that I move, the constant comments about my economic vulnerability. It wasn't love that had united this couple. It was the desperate need to find a solution to their financial problems. And my apartment, located in one of the most exclusive areas of the city, was their lifeline. The revelation hit me like a slap to the soul. My son, the boy I had raised with values of honesty and hard work, had chosen the easy path of manipulation and deceit. He had allowed an ambitious woman to convince him to see his own mother as a resource to be exploited instead of a person to be loved and respected. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, their attempts became more aggressive. Aura, you can't keep being so selfish, Juliet had said to me just 3 days before the ceremony. Ethan and I have sacrificed so much for this marriage. The least you could do is help us with housing. By then, her words no longer even pretended to sound caring. It was a blunt demand, poorly disguised as a family request. That night, I made a choice that set everything in motion. I called Carlos, my financial advisor and the only person I had trusted completely since my husband Robert passed away. Carlos, I need you to prepare some documents, I told him quietly. There's a strong chance I'll soon have to disclose information I've kept private for many years. His tone shifted immediately. Mrs. Hughes, are you certain this is the right moment? He asked, speaking with the calm caution of someone who had managed my affairs for over a decade. Once this becomes public, there's no reversing it. It could permanently damage family relationships. But my decision was already final. The family I had tried to protect through silence had chosen betrayal instead. Now, sitting alone in my car in the ballroom parking lot, waiting for Carlos to arrive with the papers that would rewrite everything, I understood that the moment of reckoning had arrived. 25 minutes remained. In 25 minutes, Juliet, Ethan, and every guest who had looked at me with pity would learn who Aurora Hughes truly was 25 minutes before their flawless worlds, built on greed and deception, collapsed like castles made of sand. Gentle night breeze stirred the leaves in the trees, casting shifting shadows beneath the street. There was something almost poetic about it on such a calm, beautiful evening. So many carefully maintained illusions were about to vanish forever. 20 minutes had passed since my call, each second stretching endlessly. From where I sat, I could see the ballroom glowing in warm gold, hear laughter and music drifting through the open windows. It felt unreal knowing that in mere moments, that joyful celebration would turn into a nightmare for those at its center. I closed my eyes and allowed the most painful memories of the past months to resurface. I needed to remember exactly why there was no turning back. The deepest humiliation had taken place just 2 weeks before the wedding, during what Juliet had labeled an important family meeting. She arrived at my apartment not only with Ethan, but with her parents as well, a carefully orchestrated ambush. Aurora. "We want to talk about your future," Juliet's mother began. She was a cold woman who looked at me as if I were an inconvenience. "We believe it's time for you to start making responsible decisions," Juliet's father added. He was a heavy-set man whose eyes scanned my apartment like a real estate evaluator. "At your age, living alone in a place this large is unnecessary and unsafe," he continued. "What if something happens to you and no one notices for days?" Their remarks were rehearsed, too polished to be spontaneous. Throughout it all, Ethan stayed quiet, nodding occasionally like a trained marionette. Watching him sit there beside people who treated me as an obstacle felt like witnessing the slow extinction of the son I had raised. "Mom," he finally said, his voice unfamiliar. "There, right? Juliet and I have talked about this, and we believe it would be best if you moved somewhere more suitable for your age." "Appropriate for my age," I repeated, feeling the anger begin to boil inside. "And who gets to decide what's appropriate for me?" "You." Juliet's mother exchanged a knowing look with her husband, as if my words confirmed something they had already discussed. "Aurora, we understand this can be difficult to accept, but you must think about what's best for Ethan and Juliet, what's best for them." I murmured, beginning to understand the true dimension of the conspiracy that had been woven behind my back. "And I suppose my apartment would be perfect for them to start their married life, right?" Thick with silence. that followed my question was all the answer I needed. They had planned every detail of this conversation, every argument, every psychological pressure. Juliet took control at that moment, deploying her full arsenal of emotional manipulation. Aurora, it's not just about the apartment, it's about your well-being. We've been doing research and we found a wonderful residence for people your age. It has 24-hour medical services, social activities, prepared meals. You could make friends with people who understand what you're going through. Her fake smile made me nauseous. What I'm going through? I asked, figning. And what exactly do you think I'm going through, Juliet? She looked at Ethan for support before answering, well, loneliness, financial uncertainty, the fear of not being able to take care of yourself. It's normal at your age, Aurora. You don't have to be ashamed of needing help. The audacity of this 28-year-old woman telling me what was normal at my age left me speechless for a moment. But then I saw something in her eyes that chilled me. The absolute certainty that she had a right to my life, my home, my decisions. To her, I was no longer a person with autonomy, but an obstacle Tobe removed with as little resistance as possible. We've run the numbers, Juliet's father continued, pulling out a folder they had clearly prepared in advance. The cost of the residence would be approximately $2,500 a month. With the sale of your apartment, you'd have enough money to cover it for many years, and there would still be some left over too. Well, to help Ethan and Juliet with their initial marriage expenses. There it was, the naked, raw truth. It wasn't about my well-being or my safety. It was about money. It was about converting my home into cash to finance their unsustainable lifestyle. And if I refuse, I asked, although I already knew the answer, Aurora, Ethan said, his voice sounding rehearsed. We hope it won't be necessary to take more drastic measures. But if your mental health deteriorates to the point that you can't make rational decisions, the implicit threat was crystal clear. If I didn't cooperate voluntarily, they would seek legal ways to declare me incompetent. They had done their research, they had planned. They had prepared the ground to take everything I owned by force, if necessary. The son I had raised with so much love was sitting right there, allowing strangers to threaten his own mother. That night, after they left with my firm refusal, I cried for the first time in years. No tout of sadness, but for the definitive death of the illusions I had held about my family. I had called Carlos. I need you to investigate something urgently, I had told him through tears. I want to know exactly what the real financial situation is for my son and his fiancée. Everything. Debts, income, liabilities, everything. The results of that investigation had been devastating. Ethan earned $45,000 annually as a sales manager, but had debts of more than $80,000 on credit cards. Juliet worked part-time as an homage consultant, making maybe $4,000 a year, but spent as if she had an executive salary. Together, they owed more than $120,000, not counting the loans they had taken out for the wedding. The apartment they rented for $2,000 a month was 3 months behind on payments. The cars they drove were financed by monthly payments that consumed nearly 60% of their combined income. Their primary credit card was already maxed out, and they had begun relying on cash advances just to stay afloat. They were spiraling financially, and my apartment had become their last remaining lifeline. But Carlos's report contained something even more devastating. For 6 months straight, Ethan had been contacting banks and insurance companies, asking about loans secured against his elderly mother's property. He had inquired about the legal process required to obtain financial power of attorney over senior citizens. My own son had been quietly planning to strip me of everything I owned. The most crushing detail appeared at the very end of the report. According to a private investigator Carlos had hired, Juliet had been telling her friends that she had sacrificed herself by getting engaged to an older, less appealing man, all because his mother owned valuable real estate and had no serious heirs. To her, marrying Ethan had nothing to do with love. It was a calculated investment in my estate. That discovery shattered whatever remained of my heart. For weeks, I had debated simply revealing the truth about my finances, hoping the shock alone might force them to reconsider their behavior. But after reading that report, I finally understood the reality. This wasn't about need or fear or survival. It was about cold, deliberate greed that had hollowed out my son until I barely recognized him anymore. The days leading up to the wedding were nothing short of agony. Every call from Ethan felt like another attempt to wear me down. Each visit from Juliet came loaded with venomous remarks about my stubbornness and selfishness. They had already begun treating me as if I were a senile old woman, someone whose opinions no longer mattered. The night before the wedding, Ethan made one last effort. "Mum, tomorrow is the most important day of my life," he said. "Please don't ruin it by being difficult. Juliet only wants what's best for all of us." Those words sealed everything. In that moment, I understood I had lost my son. The man preparing to marry the next day was no longer the boy I had raised with love, patience, and sacrifice, now sitting alone in my car and waiting for Carlos. I saw clearly that every step had led me here. This wasn't about revenge or cruelty. It was about justice, about consequences, about teaching them that some boundaries, once crossed, can never be undone. 15 minutes remained before everything changed. My hands shook as I dialed another number. Joseph, my neighbor from the apartment next door. He was 70, quiet, observant, and had witnessed every tense visit over the past months. "Joseph, it's Aurora," I said, my voice unsteady. "I need a very important favor. Please go to my apartment and bring me the brown folder from the second drawer of my desk right now. It's urgent." Joseph had been like a brother to me since Robert died. I trusted him completely, and I knew he wouldn't ask questions as I waited. I thought back to a conversation we'd had just a week earlier. From his balcony, Joseph had seen Juliet arrive at my building with a real estate appraiser without telling me. "Aurora, that girl came with a man carrying a briefcase," he had told me, worry heavy in his voice. "He was measuring your apartment from the outside. When they noticed me watching, they left quickly. I don't like this at all." Joseph had also been the first to notice the changes in Ethan. "Your son doesn't greet me anymore," he'd said. "He used to stop and talk when he visited you. Now he rushes in and out, like he's hiding something." His words only confirmed what my heart had already accepted. I had lost my son long before the slap in the ballroom theft folder. I had asked. Joseph 4 contained documents no one in my family had ever seen. Bank certificates, property titles, investment records that Robert and I had kept secret for decades. Documents that proved the poor widow living on a modest pension was actually a woman with enough resources to change lives with a single decision. 10 minutes later, Joseph appeared in the parking lot with the folder in his hands. "Aura, what's going on?" "You look very upset," he asked as he handed me the documents. "It has to do with Ethan's wedding." I explained briefly what had happened in the ballroom, and I saw his face harden with every detail. "That woman is a Viper," he muttered. "I always knew it." "Joseph, in a few minutes, a man named Carlos will arrive. When you see him, tell him I'm waiting for him here," I asked. "And Joseph, after tonight, many things are going to change. I want you to know you have always been like family to me." His eyes filled with tears as your family to me, to Aurora. "Do what you have to do." As Joseph returned to the building, I opened the folder and began to review documents I hadn't looked at in months. The first was a bank statement showing a balance of $5,400,000 in an investment account. The second was the property title for a downtown office building that generated monthly rent of $50,000. The third was the deed to a beach house I had bought as an investment 10 years. Robert had been a genius at investments, starting with a small import business and turning it into Azalent empire. Together, we had made the decision to live modestly to protect our privacy and our family's security. Visible wealth attracts problems. Robert used to say, "Invisible wealth gives you power." I never imagined I would have to use that power against my own son. Each document in that folder represented years of hard work and smart decisions. The flower shop where I worked 3 days a week wasn't because I needed the money, but because I liked to stay active and connected to the community. The old car we drove wasn't due to economic limitations, but because I had learned that unnecessary ostentation only brings it. My apartment, the one Juliet so coveted, was actually the least valuable property in my portfolio. I had bought it not for its economic value, but for the memories it held. It was where Robert and I had spent our last years together, where we had planned our future, where he had passed away in my arms after a brave battle with cancer. But there was something else in that folder that would change everything for Rethon and Juliet. For the last 3 years, since my son had started having financial problems, I had been secretly paying many of his debts. The credit card payments he thought came from a work bonus were actually coming out of my account. The special discount on his rent that he had negotiated with his landlord was money I transferred monthly. Without Ethan knowing, I had been subsidizing his irresponsibility for years. The luxurious apartment he lived in, the car he drove, even some of the expenses for the wedding that was taking place at that very moment had been made possible by my scret financial support. I had thought I was helping my son through a difficult time, not realizing I was financing his transformation into a person I didn't recognize. The bank records showed monthly transfers totaling $4,500. That had kept the sinking ship of Ethan's financial life afloat. Money, he thought, came from work bonuses or tax refunds, when in reality it was his mother desperately trying to protect him from the consequences of his irresponsible decisions. The irony was devastating. While Juliet was humiliating me for being an economic burden on their future marriage, I was literally the only reason they could afford that marriage, while they were planning to strip me of my apartment to solve their financial problems. I had been solving those problems in secret for years. I closed the folder and looked toward the ballroom once more. The lights were still shining. The music was still playing. The guests were but in less than 5 minutes, Carlos would arrive with the final documents I needed. In less than 5 minutes. The process of cutting all the financial threads I had used to protect a son who had chosen to betray me would begin. This is not revenge, I reminded myself. This is justice. This was about teaching them that every choice carries consequences. That greed demands payment. That family is not a commodity to be traded for financial comfort. I had sheltered Ethan from reality for far too long, and that shelter had slowly poisoned him until he became someone I no longer recognized. Headlights suddenly cut through the darkness of the parking lot, flooding the asphalt with harsh white light. The glare faded, and I recognized Carlos's car. As always, he was on time, arriving with the documents that would alter everything irrevocably. Stepped out of my vehicle and walked toward him, aware that with every step I was leaving behind the woman I had pretended to be. And moving closer to the woman I now had to become, Mrs. Hughes, Carlos said as he exited his car, a leather briefcase tucked under his arm. "Are you absolutely certain? Once we walk back in there, nothing can be undone." I glanced toward the ballroom doors one last time. Inside, my son and his new wife were likely still celebrating, convinced they had triumphed over a helpless old woman. "I've never been more certain of anything," I replied calmly. "It's time they meet the real Aurora Hughes." Under the glow of the parking lot light, Carlos opened his folder and began laying out the paperwork with his usual precision. "This document suspends all bank transfers made in Ethan Hughes's name, effective immediately," he explained, indicating the first page. "And this is the termination notice for the lease you've been quietly guaranteeing. The landlord will receive it first thing tomorrow." I accepted the papers, my hands shaking slightly, but my resolve unbroken. Each page represented a thread I had spent years weaving to protect my son, and now I was severing them one by one. "And the ballroom?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Cancelled," Carlos confirmed. "The deposit you secured will be withdrawn tonight. They'll have until tomorrow to arrange alternative payment." The weight of it all hit me at once. For 3 years, I had been the invisible foundation holding Ethan and Juliet's lives together. Their apartment, his car, even the wedding unfolding inside that building, all of it had been quietly financed by me, and now, in a single night, that support was gone. "Carlos," I said as I signed each document with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years, "this isn't vengeance, and it certainly isn't cruelty. This is the only way they'll ever understand the value of what they've taken for granted. I protected them from consequences for too long, and that protection destroyed them." Carlos nodded, genuine respect in his eyes. "I understand completely, Mrs. Hughes. In my 30 years as an advisor, I've seen families torn apart by entitlement and greed. What you're doing takes more courage than most people ever find." His words gave me the final strength I needed. Together, we walked toward the ballroom entrance. With every step, my heart beat faster, not from fear, but from a strange blend of grief and anticipation. Grief for what I had lost. Anticipation for what I was about to reclaim. My dignity, my right to be treated as a human being rather than a financial resource. The music stopped the moment we entered. 130 faces turned toward us, confusion rippling through the room. A few guests recognized Carlos immediately. His presence at social gatherings rarely meant anything trivial. Juliet reacted first. "What are you doing here, Aurora?" she shouted from the center of the dance floor, where she had been posing for photographs with Ethan. "You already caused enough drama tonight. Wasn't that enough?" Her voice still carried its familiar arrogance, but beneath it I sensed something new, unease. "Ladies and gentlemen, Carlos said, his voice calm and authoritative. "I apologize for the interruption, but I must address urgent legal matters concerning Mr. Ethan Hughes and Mrs. Juliet Dawson." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed loud. Several guests instinctively raised their phones. Sensing they were about to witness something unforgettable, Ethan stepped forward slowly. His face had drained of color, confusion clouding his eyes. "Mum," he asked quietly, the confidence he'd shown earlier completely gone. "What's happening? Who is this man, and why is he talking about legal matters?" I could see his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture he had had since childhood. "Ethan," I said in a voice firmer than it had sounded in it, "this is Carlos Jones, my financial and legal advisor. He has Cometto deliver some documents that I think you will find very enlightening." Carlos opened his folder and took out first document. "Mr. Ethan Hughes, you are hereby notified that the financial guarantee your mother had provided for your lease agreement has been immediately cancelled. Your landlord will be notified tomorrow morning, and you will have 30 days to find a new guarantor or vacate the property." All the color drained from Ethan's face. "Financial guarantee," he murmured, looking at me with eyes that were beginning to fill with comprehension and horror. "Ma'am, what is he talking about?" But I could see from his expression that a part of him already knew. For years, he had suspected that his financial luck wasn't completely natural, but he had chosen not to ask questions because Thiensworth might have been uncomfortable. Also, Carlos continued relentlessly. "The monthly transfers of $4,500 that your mother had been making to your personal accounts have been paid. This includes payments for credit cards, car insurance, and various other expenses that you believed were being covered by other sources." Juliet let out a gasp that echoed throughout the ballroom. "That's impossible," she exclaimed, running toward us, her wedding dress dragging on the floor. "Ethan doesn't have a rich mother. Look how she lives. Look at her clothes, her car. She's an old woman living on a miserable pension." Her hysteria was evident, and several guests began to murmur among themselves with increasing fascination. Finally, Carlos said, taking the last document from his folder, "The guaranteed payment for this celebration has also been. The ballroom management will have the right to demand full payment before guests can leave tonight." His words fell on the ballroom like a bomb, and I could see some guests nervously begin to move toward the exits. The realization hit Ethan like a hammer. "You," he muttered, looking at me with eyes that couldn't fully process what they were hearing. "You've been all that. You've been paying for everything." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment I saw the small boy he had once been, vulnerable and confused. "For 3 years, Ethan," I confirmed in a voice that sounded strangely calm after the emotional storm I had been living through. 3 years in which I thought I was helping you get through a difficult time. For 3 years, I continued, I believed you might come back to yourself, 3 years I waited, hoping you'd remember the principles I raised you with. Juliet began pacing wildly, clutching her head as panic overtook her. No, no, this isn't happening, she screamed, her voice cracking as the guests watched with a mix of shock and grim curiosity. You're just a poor old woman. You work in a flower shop. You drive a 10-year-old car, but you can't have money. Appearances can be misleading. Juliet, I said at last, feeling decades of careful restraint fall away. Robert and I chose a simple life because we understood something most people don't. Visible wealth attracts trouble. We were right. We just never imagined the danger would come from within our own family. The music had completely stopped. The ballroom was filled only with strained breathing and the restless murmurs of guests slowly realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Several phones were already raised, instinctively recording what would soon become legend. "Mum," Ethan whispered, his voice fractured. "Please. There has to be a way to fix this. The wedding, the guests, everything." But when I looked into his eyes, I saw the truth finally settling in. He wasn't just losing money or comfort. He was losing me, the woman who had loved him without conditions for 35 years. The only way to fix this, Ethan, I said quietly, was not to break it in the first place. A heavy silence fell over the room. 130 people stood frozen, absorbing the weight of those words. For the first time that night, Juliet stopped moving. Her eyes darted between Carlos, the documents in his hands, and my face, as if desperately searching for a crack in a reality that was collapsing too fast to escape. Ethan stared at me with an expression I would never forget: shock, delayed understanding, and pure terror tangled together. "Mrs. Hughes," Carlos said, his voice clear and loud enough for everyone to hear. "Would you like me to proceed with a full disclosure of the financial records?" The question hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Guests edged closer, drawn in by the unfolding spectacle. "Yes, Carlos," I replied calmly, surprising even myself. "Everyone deserves to hear the truth." Juliet tried to interrupt with a shrill cry, but Carlos raised a hand and continued, methodical and precise, like a surgeon making the final incision. Over the past 36 months, he began consulting the documents. Mrs. Aurora Hughes has transferred a total of $162,000 to support her son, Ethan Hughes, and his fiancée. A wave of murmurs rippled through the ballroom. This amount includes $48,000 in rent, $44,000 in credit card payments, $18,000 for vehicle-related expenses, and $22,000 for miscellaneous costs. Gasps followed. Some guests exchanged stunned looks. Others instinctively opened calculators on their phones. Checking the numbers for themselves, Juliet's mother, who had remained seated until then, slowly stood up. Her face had drained of all color. Carlos didn't pause. In addition, he continued, Mrs. Hughes personally guaranteed the full cost of this event, including the venue, catering, entertainment, floral arrangements, and photography, totaling $53,000. He closed the folder slightly. As previously stated, those funds are no longer available. Juliet finally spoke again, but the sound was barely coherent. This is impossible. It's a lie. No one with that kind of money lives like a beggar. She turned to the guests, searching for support, but found only captivated faces, and more than a few barely concealed smiles. "My dear Juliet," I said evenly, my calm standing in sharp contrast to her hysteria. "You've just learned a very expensive lesson about judging people by appearances. Robert and I lived simply because we valued privacy over display. As it turns out, that choice protected us far longer than anyone realized." Ethan moved toward me, his steps uncertain. "There has to be an explanation. Some way to fix this. You can't destroy my life." His voice broke, and for a brief moment, maternal pain flickered inside me. "Destroy your life," I repeated softly, and then felt the anger rise again. "I'm destroying your life. Wasn't it your wife who slapped me in front of 130 people? Wasn't it you who stood by without saying a word while I was being humiliated? Wasn't it you who planned to strip me of my home?" The truth of my words resonated in the ballroom like church bells. Several guests nodded, clearly remembering the scene that had started all this drama. Some even had videos on their phones of the slap Juliet had given me. Digital evidence of cruelty that had triggered this revelation. "But that was different," Ethan muttered, though his voice lacked. "We didn't know. We didn't understand. We thought you really needed help." His excuses sounded pathetic even to himself, and I could see some guests exchanging looks of contempt. "You didn't know?" I asked, my voice rising for the first time all night. "You didn't know you were planning a family ambush to pressure me into selling my... You didn't know you had brought a real estate appraiser without my knowledge. You didn't know you had been investigating legal ways to declare me incompetent if I didn't cooperate." With each question, Ethan's posture shrank. Carlos took advantage of the moment to pull another document from his folder, "Mr. Hughes. I must also inform you that your mother has decided to amend all assets that were previously designated for you to inherit, have been redirected to charities dedicated to protecting seniors from family abuse." The impact of this declaration was like a silent explosion. Gillette staggered backward as if she had been physically hit. "You can't do that," she shrieked, her mask of composure finally falling completely. "We're your family. Ethan is your only son. You can't disinherit him over a stupid fight. A stupid fight." I repeated, letting the words hang in the tension-filled air. "Is that how you describe a family conspiracy to strip an old woman of her home?" Is that how you justify slapping your husband's mother on her own wedding day? My voice had turned icy, and I could see some guests. Juliet's father, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally approached with an expression of poorly disguised panic. Mrs. Hughes, I think we're all a little loopsit by the emotions of the day. Maybe we could discuss this in private when things have calmed down a bit. His tone was that of a man who had just realized he had bet on the wrong horse. There's nothing to discuss in private, I replied firmly. Everything I had to say has been said here in front of the same people who witnessed my humiliation. You chose to make this public. So my response will be public. The guests' heads moved between us, as if watching a tennis match, absorbed in every exchange. Carlos closed his folder with a dry snap that echoed throughout the ballroom. Mrs. Hughes. All documents have been delivered and explained. The legal effects will begin immediately. He turned to Ethan and Juliet with a professional expression, but not without a certain satisfaction. I suggest you contact your own legal and financial advisors as soon as possible. Juliet finally collapsed. She literally dropped into a nearby chair and began to cry with uncontrolled sobs that echoed through the ballroom. Everything is ruined, she murmured through her tears. Everything wetland, everything we worked for. It's all destroyed. Her wedding dress on Immaculate was now wrinkled and stained with tears. No, I said, approaching her for the first time since the slap. What's destroyed are the lies, the greed, and the lack of respect. What's destroyed is the illusion that you can treat people like objects and expect there to be no consequences. I stopped in front of her, forcing her to look up. This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. But Ethan went to his wife and placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. Juliet, we have to find a way to fix this. There has to be something we can do. But even as he spoke, I could see in his eyes that he knew it was too late. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. There is a way to fix this, Ethan, I said, looking him directly in the eyes for the first time in months without feeling pain. But you can learn from this. You can grow from this. You can become the people I hoped you would be before greed corrupted you. My voice softened slightly because despite everything, he was still my son. But that growth will have to happen without my apartment and without my inheritance. You will have to do it the hard way like everyone else does. The ballroom remained in absolute silence. Every person presented knowing that they were witnessing the definitive end of a family relationship. Carlos and I headed toward the exit, leaving behind a ballroom full of shocked guests and a newlywed couple whose perfect world had collapsed in less than 30 minutes. As Carlos and I walked toward the exit, the silence behind us was interrupted by a voice I didn't expect to hear. Wait, or it was Lucy Ethanzianger's sister, who had been sitting at a table in the back throughout the confrontation. She ran toward us with tears in her eyes and an expression of absolute horror on her face. Aunt Aurora, Lucy said in a shaking voice. I swear I didn't know what Ethan and Juliet were planning. If I had known, I would have stopped them. Lucy had always been my favorite niece, a young teacher who stayed close to me even after Ethan pulled away. I looked at her and saw the same honesty she'd had as a child. I know, Lucy, I said softly, touching her cheek. You've never seen people as things to be used. Through tears, she asked, why did you hide the money for so many years? Because Robert and I learned long ago that money changes people. I replied, it destroys families and turns love into entitlement. We chose a simple life to protect what truly mattered. Lucy nodded. Ethan used to be different. He was changed by greed, disguised as love, I said quietly. And by my mistake of protecting him from consequences, at that moment, Carlos leaned in. Mrs. Hughes, the ballroom manager, is coming. He's been notified of the cancelled payment. A man in a suit approached us. Mrs. Hughes, the $53,000 guarantee for this event has been withdrawn. Who will now be responsible for payment? I revoked the guarantee, I answered calmly. Ethan rushed forward, desperate. Mom, please. There are guests, photos, memories. You can't ruin everything. I'm not ruining anything, I said steadily. You did when you chose greed over respect. Juliet whispered in panic. What are we supposed to do? You'll do what responsible adults do, I replied. Work, live within your means, and learn that nothing in life is owed to you. Carlos turned to me and said, all documents have been delivered. There's nothing more to do here. His message was clear. It was time to leave. Ethan and Juliet. To face the consequences of their choices without my presence to distract them. Lucy came forward and hugged me tightly. Aunt Aurora, you will always have my respect and love. No matter what happens with Ethan, her words struck my wounded heart. A reminder that not all family had been corrupted by greed, and you will always have mine. Lucy, I replied, returning the hug. Remember tonight when you make important decisions. Character isn't defined by wealth, but by how we treat the people we love. Her tears soaked my shoulder as she nodded. Understanding the lesson unfolding before her, Martinez approached again, urgency in his voice. Ladies and gentlemen, we need an immediate resolution. Staff cannot wait indefinitely without payment. You have my number, I said to Ethan and Juliet for the last time. When you are ready to understand respect, values, and responsibility, when you can look me in the eye and apologize sincerely, then we can talk. But first, you must solve the mess you created on your own. With that, I turned and walked toward the exit with Carlos, leaving a ballroom full of chaos, despair, and the reality of well-deserved consequences. 3 days later, my apartment had become a peaceful refuge. Joseph arrived each morning with coffee and pastries, checking on me after what he called the night Aurora reclaimed her dignity. His presence reminded me that some family still valued me for who I truly was. The phone had rung incessantly. Ethan called 37 times, messages evolving from anger to desperate pleading. Juliet sent 14 frantic texts. Her parents appeared twice, demanding I fix the chaos I had caused. But I remained calm, steadier than I had been in years. That morning, Carlos brought news both expected and devastating. Mrs. Hughes, reports have come in from all fronts. Ethan and Juliet were evicted yesterday. The ballroom has begun legal action to recover the $53,000. Their credit cards have been cancelled. And where are they now? I asked, already knowing the answer. With Juliet's parents, Carlos replied. Apparently, it's a two-bedroom apartment with 3 people already living there. The situation is tense, my sources said. The expression on their face suggested that tense was an understatement. That afternoon, while watering my plants, I saw a familiar car pull up. Lucy wasn't alone. Amelia, my old real estate friend, and Joseph were with her. Aurora, Lucy called. We need to talk. There are things you must know. Inside my apartment, their faces were urgent, concerned. Lucy handed me a folder. Since the wedding, I've been investigating Ethan and Juliet. You need to see this before it's too late. Too late for what? I asked, trying to stay calm. Amelia spoke, voice trembling. They've been planning this for over a year. Juliet consulted lawyers about declaring you mentally incompetent to take control of your properties. Joseph leaned in gravely. And there's more. After the ballroom, I overheard Juliet on the phone. She said you ruined everything, but Plan B is still in motion. Plan B, I repeated, stomach tightening. Lucy squeezed my hand. They've been spreading stories that you're senile, that the wedding scene proved you've lost touch with reality. They're building a legal case to control your affairs. Amelia added, she's even going door to door, trying to get neighbors to report any concerning behavior. At that moment, Carlos entered. His face was serious. Mrs. Hughes, Ethan filed a petition yesterday. He wants a court to assess your mental competency. He's included sworn statements from wedding guests describing your behavior as irrational and your financial decisions as destructive. Lucy gripped my hand tighter. Most of these guests don't understand what really happened. They only saw an older woman confront a young couple. Then Joseph smiled. But there's good news. Many guests recorded the wedding. Videos have gone viral. People aren't seeing a senile woman. They're seeing a dignified woman exposing years of manipulation. Amelia leaned in. The comments are overwhelmingly supportive. You're being praised for courage, dignity, and setting boundaries. You've become a symbol against exploitation of the elderly. Carlos nodded. This public response will be invaluable if it goes to court. It's hard to argue mental incompetence when thousands see the logic and justice of your actions. For 3 days, I had made a decision. If Ethan and Juliet want a public legal battle, they will discover exactly who they're messing with. I gathered the folder I'd been preparing: documentation of intimidation, threats, the conspiracy to take my property, even the slap Juliet had delivered, photographs, medical evidence, lawyer notes. Everything was ready. If they want war, I said, determination surging through me, it will be on my terms, with my resources, and with the truth on my side. And for the first time in years, I added, I would go public. I would show the world what happens when greed masquerades as family love. The energy in the room was electric. Justice was on our side. 6 months later, I sat in a major television studio about to tell my story to the entire country. The wedding videos had gone viral, surpassing 2 million views, and my story had become a symbol of resistance against senior abuse. The journalist, Catherine Diaz, smiled warmly. Mrs. Hughes, your courage has inspired thousands. We've received hundreds of letters from people in similar situations. The legal fallout had been swift and total. Ethan and Juliet's attempt to declare me incompetent collapsed. They were fined for frivolous litigation and ordered to pay my $45,000 in legal fees. Bankruptcy followed. Ethan lost his job. Juliet's attempts at a career were ruined. They now lived in a tiny apartment. Struggling with part-time jobs and mounting debt, Carlos was by my side to explain the legal details. Joseph, Lucy, and Amelia were in the audience, my pillars of support. Ethan had remained silent, making no effort to contact me. No apologies, no acknowledgement. Juliet had tried at first with threats, then desperate pleas for help. The last message, just 2 weeks ago, said, Aurora, Ethan is sick with stress, and I'm pregnant. Please, don't let your grandchild grow up in poverty. The news of the pregnancy stabbed at me. I would be a grandmother, yet my grandchild would grow up in a home poisoned by resentment toward me. But I had learned the hardest lesson. You cannot save people who refuse to be saved. Trying only enables destruction. Mrs. Hughes. We'll start in 30 seconds, the producer announced. I took a deep breath, thinking of all the seniors who had written to me, parents, grandparents, victims of manipulation. I drew strength from them. We are live in 3, 2, 1. The red light on the camera came on, and Catherine began with an introduction she had rehearsed perfectly. Good evening and welcome to Stories of a Lifetime. I am Catherine Diaz, and tonight we have with us a 68-year-old woman whose story has shocked the nation and put the issue of family abuse against seniors at the center of a national debate. Mrs. Hughes, Catherine continued, turning tone 6 months after the events at your son's wedding. How does it feel to know that your story has inspired so many? Her question was direct but compassionate, allowing me to start on my own terms. I feel grateful, I replied, feeling my voice stabilize as is grateful that something as painful as the loss of my relationship with my son has served to help other people in similar situations. For months, I felt lonely and confused, wondering if I was the one who what. Now, I know that what I went through is more common than any of us would like to admit. Catherine nodded and consulted her notes. Tell us about the years leading up to that night when you started to realize that something wasn't right in your relationship with your son and his fiancée. It was the question I had been waiting for. The opportunity to explain how emotional and financial abuse develops gradually, almost imperceptibly. It started with small things, I explained, remembering those early signs I had ignored out of love. Comments about my age, suggestions that I could no longer take care of myself. Subtle pressures for me to make decisions factually benefited them. Family abuse rarely begins with blows or shouting. It begins with the slow erosion of your self-confidence, with making you question your own reality. Carlos leaned forward to add legal context. What Aurora describes is a classic pattern we see in elder abuse cases. The perpetrators, especially when they are family members, use psychological manipulation tactics before proceeding to more direct forms of coercion. It's insidious because it's disguised as loving concern. And the moment of the revelation, Catherine asked, when did you decide to expose the truth about your financial situation? It was the question I knew would come, the one that required me to explain the most difficult decision of my life. The slap, I replied simply. When Juliet slapped me in the middle of the ballroom in front of 130 people for refusing to hand over keys to my apartment, I knew she had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. In that moment, I understood that it was no longer about protecting my family from the consequences of their actions. It was about protecting myself from continuing to be abused. The interview continued for 45 minutes, covering all aspects of my story. I talked about the decision to live simplito, protect my privacy, about the years of secret financial support I had provided, about the conspiracy to declare me incompetent, and about the legal battle that followed. Each answer was designed not only to tell my story, but to educate others about the warning signs and available resources. Mrs. Hughes, Catherine, said near the end of the program, "Do you have a message for your son if he is watching this interview tonight?" It was the most difficult question, the one I had been both dreading and hoping for. I looked directly into the camera, knowing there was a chance Ethan was watching. Ethan, if you are listening to this, I want you to know that I still love you. I will always love you because you are my son. But loving someone doesn't mean allowing them to abuse you. Loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity for their convenience. It doesn't mean becoming a victim of their greed. The doors to my heart will always be open for you, I said, tears welling. but only if you can walk through them as the honorable person I tried to raise you to be. Only if you accept responsibility for your actions. Only if you've learned that family is built on love and respect. Not manipulation. Turning to the audience, I added, to anyone watching who sees their own story in mine, you have the right to be treated with dignity, to control your money, your home, your life. You have the right to set boundaries and to seek help when they are violated. When the cameras turned off, the studio erupted in applause. Catherine hugged me, tears in her eyes. Aurora, that was one of the most powerful interviews I've ever done. But it will change lives. Carlos nodded proudly. We had achieved more than winning a legal case. We had inspired a movement. That night, driving home with Joseph, Lucy, and Amelia, I felt peace for the first time in years. I had defended my truth, told my story, and transformed my pain into something meaningful. Lucy said from the back seat, Aunt Aurora, I'm so proud of you. You turned the worst experience of your life into a force that will protect thousands. The apartment Juliet had once coveted now felt like home again. Not because of legal victories, but because I had learned to value myself and demand respect. I had discovered that sometimes the only way to save a relationship is to be willing to lose it. 2 years later, I sit on that same balcony, reflecting on the life I reclaimed. Each morning, Carmen, coordinator of the Aurora Hughes Foundation for the Protection of Seniors, updates me on new cases. Adult children pressuring older parents, emotional blackmail, property manipulation. Each file is a mirror of my past. The foundation has helped over 400 seniors regain control of their finances, homes, and assets. Joseph is vice president, sharing his decades of experience in detecting family manipulation. Lucy, my niece, is educational director, bringing purpose to her life while honoring our bond. My book. When Love Hurts, An Elderly Woman Fights Back, became a national bestseller with royalties funding the foundation. Carlos, still my trusted advisor, has recovered over $3 million in properties and savings for families we've helped. Do I miss Ethan? I miss the child he was, the young man of fleeting kindness. I miss the illusion of the family I thought we had. But I don't miss the manipulation, blackmail, and disrespect. In 2 years. He has called only 3 times, never to apologize, always to ask for money. His pattern hasn't changed. He sees his problems as injustices, not consequences. Each conversation lasts minutes and leaves me resolute. I will protect my dignity, my life, and the lessons I've earned, and ended when he said, Mum, your pride is more important than your grandson. I replied with a clarity that surprised me. Ethan, my dignity is exactly as important as my grandson, and I hope that one day he learns that lesson better than you did. It was the first time I had ever hung up the phone on Misen. And it was also strangely liberating. The topic of Oliver Migranson is the only one that can still make me cry. He is 14 months old and does not know me. When Juliet left, she took all the family photographs, including the few I had of him. I have created a trust fund for his college education administered by Carlos that will be available when he turns 18. Regardless of the relationship we have by then, maybe Amelia tells me during our weekly dinners when Oliver is older that he will seek his own answers about what happened in his family. Maybe he will find the courage to get to know his grandmother for himself. But Amelia has become my closest confidant, especially since she also had to set difficult boundaries with toxic family members a decade ago. What surprises me most about these 2 years is how much my physical and mental health have improved. During the last few years with Ethan and Juliet, I had developed chronic insomnia, constant headaches, and an anxiety that kept me in a state of permanent alert. My doctor says my current tests show the stress levels OAA woman 10 years younger. Aurora, Dr. Hernandez told me during my last checkup, it's impressive how the body responds when we eliminate sources of toxic stress. Your blood pressure is your sleep is restorative. Even your posture has improved. He's right. I walk more upright. My voice sounds firmer and my hands no longer tremble when I make important decisions. The flower shop where I worked closed a year ago, but I found a new passion in the community garden I helped establish in the building. I teach other older residents about medicinal plants and organic growing techniques. It's an activity that connects me with the earth and with people who appreciate accumulated wisdom, instead of seeing ITA's obsolescence. My current routine includes 3 days a week at the foundation offices, 2 days visiting the homes of seniors who need emotional support, and weekends dedicated to writing my second book. This one will focus on practical strategies for detecting and preventing family financial abuse based on the cases we have handled. The apartment that was once a source of greed is now AI have transformed Ethan's old room into a space of peace and creativity. An office where I meet people seeking guidance. The walls are lined with thank you letters, photos of families we've helped reconcile, and diplomas from universities where I've lectured. One of the most rewarding experiences has been mentoring older women facing similar struggles. Margaret, 74, came to the foundation after her son sold her car to pay gambling debts. 3 months later, she sent me a photo of herself smiling in her new car, purchased with her own recovered savings. Aurora, she wrote, "You taught me that setting boundaries is not cruelty, it's survival. Self-love is not selfishness, it's a necessity. It's never too late to stand up for yourself." Her words reminded me why all the pain had been worth it. Reflecting on these 2 years, I see that my story does not have a traditional happy ending of family reconciliation, but it has something far more meaningful, authenticity, reclaimed dignity, and a purpose that transforms personal pain into action. Sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is walking away from those who refuse to respect you. If I could speak to the Aurora who walked into that wedding ballroom 2 years ago, I would say, have courage. It will be painful. But on the other side awaits a life more authentic than you ever imagined. Peace awaits, the peace of never again allowing anyone to treat you as disposable. Now, at 70, my life is richer and more meaningful than at 68. Tomorrow, I meet with senators to discuss legislation protecting seniors from family abuse. Next week, I'll inaugurate the Foundation's 3rd regional center. Next month, I begin a national documentary series on the subject. I have learned that the end of a toxic relationship is not a loss, it is liberation. True family is as much chosen as it is inherited, and it is never too late to write a new chapter in your own story. When people ask if I regret what I did that night, my answer is always the same: no. Courage, dignity, and self-respect are worth every hardship.